Case number 22, State of Hawaii versus Gerhardt Konig, 1 CPC-25-373 for further jury trial. Counsel, can I have your appearances, please?
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Joel Garner for the state. Also present, Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Franklin Don Picaro, Jr.
Morning, Mr. Garner. Morning, Mr. Picaro.
Morning, Judge.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thomas Otake and Manta Dirks on behalf of Dr. Gerhardt Konig, who is present.
Morning, Mr. Otake. Morning, Mr. Dirks. Morning, Dr. Konig.
Morning, Your Honor.
Gentlemen, all of you can be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning to all of you. Welcome back to courtroom 15. Thanks for braving the rain yet again. We're going to continue on with our schedule and the presentation of evidence. I expect us, or the plan anyway, is for us to be here for the better part of today. I know it feels like a Monday, but it's really a Friday. But we'll soldier on as best as we can. And when I get a better idea on our scheduling, I'll keep you up to date as best we can. Mr. Garner, is the state ready to continue on its case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. Before the state would like to call its next witness, the state would like to read a stipulation into evidence.
Okay, before you do, so ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Garner is going to read a stipulation of facts out loud to you. This has already occurred in the trial, and just like that other stipulation of facts, the facts that are read out loud to you by Mr. Garner, they're agreed upon by the parties. These are not facts that are in dispute, and you are to treat these facts as conclusively proved. Mr. Garner.
It is hereby stipulated and agreed by and between the state of Hawaii, represented by Joel R. Garner, Deputy Prosecuting Attorney, City and County of Honolulu, State of Hawaii, and defendant Gerhardt Konig, represented by Thomas M. Otake, Esquire, that the following facts are true and accurate and shall be admitted into evidence at trial in lieu of testimonial and or documentary evidence. 1. On March 24, 2025 at 4:34 p.m., evidence custodian Eric Nagayama received items 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 under HPD report 25-110958 from evidence specialist Brittany Kopp. Evidence custodian Eric Nagayama placed items 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 into the evidence room. From the time that Eric Nagayama took possession of items 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, to the time he placed them in the evidence room, the items were in the sole custody and control of Mr. Nagayama. During that time, the items were not tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way. Number 2. On March 27, 2025, 2:57 p.m., evidence custodian Ejo Urakami removed item 2 under HPD report 25-110958 from the evidence room and provided it to Detective Tracy Spacek. From the time that evidence custodian Ejo Urakami removed item 2 under HPD report 25-110958 to the time that he provided it to Detective Spacek, item 2 remained in the sole custody and control of Mr. Urakami. During that time, the item was not tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way. Number 3. On March 27, 2025 at 2:58 p.m., evidence custodian Ejo Urakami received item number 2 under HPD report 25-110958 from the Detective Tracy Spacek and placed it into the evidence room. From the time that evidence custodian Urakami received item 2 to the time he placed it in the evidence room, item 2 remained in the sole custody and control of Mr. Urakami. During that time, the item was not tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way. On March 25th, 2025, at 7:14, Number 4. On March 25th, 2025, at 7:14 a.m., evidence custodian Keo Mika removed items 13 and 14 under HPD report 25-110958 from evidence locker 121 at the Honolulu Police Department main station and placed them in the evidence room. From the time that evidence custodian Mika removed the items from the storage locker to the time that he placed them in the evidence room, the items remained in the sole custody and control of Mr. Mika. During that time, the items were not tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way. Number 5. On March 26, 2025, at 10:42 a.m., evidence custodian Lucia Gonzalez received item 24 under HPD report 25-110958 From evidence specialist Garrick Baligad. Evidence custodian Lucia Gonzalez placed item 24 into the evidence room. From the time that Lucia Gonzalez took possession of item 24 to the time that she placed the item in the evidence room, the item was in the sole custody and control of Ms. Gonzalez. During that time, the item was not tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way. Number 6. On March 26, 2025 at 8:21 p.m., evidence custodian Jeanette Moses received item 45 under HPD report 25-110958. Received item 45 under HPD report 25-110958 from evidence specialist Mohammed Salame. Evidence custodian Jeanette Moses placed item 45 into the evidence room. From the time that Jeanette Moses took possession of item 45 to the time she placed the item in the evidence room, the item was in the sole custody and control of Ms. Moses. During that time, the item was not tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way. Number 7. On March 31, 2025 at 10:40 a.m., evidence custodian Brenda Montpetit retrieved items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 13, 14, 24, and 45, and provided them to Michelle Amorin. From the time that evidence custodian Montpetit retrieved items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 13, 14, 24, and 45, to the time that she provided them to Michelle Amorin, the items remained in the sole custody and control of Ms. Montpetit. During that time, the items were not tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way. And number 8, all of the above occurred in the city and county of Honolulu, state of Hawaii. Thank you.
Mr. Garner. Now, state's next witness.
The state calls Michelle Amorin.
You do solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, can you please state your name?
Michelle Amorin
And Ms. Amorin, where are you employed?
at HPD.
Is that the Honolulu Police Department?
Yes,
How long have you worked for HPD?
for more than 10 years.
What position do you hold there?
I am a criminalist.
And in order to be a criminalist at HPD, is there any training you have to complete?
Yes.
Okay. And before we get to the training, what are your duties or responsibilities as a criminalist?
My duties and responsibilities include performing DNA testing and serology on items of evidence, presenting my conclusions, and testifying as an expert witness.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about your education right now. Did you earn an undergraduate degree?
Yes,
And what degree did you earn?
I earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Biology
And where did you earn the degree from?
from the University of Hawaii.
At Manoa?
Yes,
Have you received any specialized training in DNA testing?
yes.
How many trainings have you attended since 2015?
I've attended over 30 different trainings.
And can you briefly describe the specialized training that you received?
These trainings were either web-based or in-person trainings that I received from different organizations, and they covered topics such as DNA mixture interpretation and the standards for DNA testing.
You mentioned organizations. What organizations did you receive these trainings from?
A couple of them are the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the California Criminalistics Institute.
Ms. Amorin, when was the most recent training you attended?
I attended a training in January of this year.
And I'm going to take a step back, also regard to training. Is there any in-house training that you have to complete to become a criminalist?
Yes. So I completed a 1-year in-house training with HPD's forensic biology unit in the area of DNA testing and serology.
And did you have to pass any exams before you started your work as a criminalist?
Yes. So the training included modules where I answered questions, got lectures, did practicals, and had to pass exams.
Ms. Amorin, do you have any certifications related to your work?
Yes, I'm certified in molecular biology by the American Board of Criminalistics.
What does it mean to be certified in molecular biology?
It means I have attained the professional qualifications in knowledge, education, and experience to practice in my field of forensics.
And you mentioned a organization that gave that certification?
Yes, the American Board of Criminalistics.
And what is that?
That is the organization that provides me with this certification.
Got it. Okay, you mentioned a couple terms so far. I want to follow up on them. You mentioned the term serology. What does serology mean?
Serology pertains to tests that can determine the possible presence of a biological fluid. At HPD, we test for blood, semen, or saliva stains.
And you mentioned forensic DNA testing. What does that mean?
Forensic DNA testing is the application of DNA testing in criminal cases.
About how many times have you performed serological analysis?
I've performed serology on over 300 different samples.
About how many times have you performed forensic DNA analysis?
On over 1,000 samples.
Have you ever been qualified to offer opinion testimony in court before?
Yes,
Approximately how many times?
over 10 times.
All right, during those 10 plus times, did you offer your opinion in forensic DNA testing and serology?
Yes,
At this point, Your Honor, the state offers the witness as qualified to provide opinion testimony in the area of serology and forensic DNA testing, subject to any voir dire examination.
Mr. Otake.
No objection to her qualifications.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Amorin will be allowed to provide opinion testimony to you in the areas of serology and forensic DNA testing. You may proceed.
Okay. Ms. Amorin, is the DNA analysis and serology that you'll testify to today based on your training, experience, and education in the field of forensic biology?
yes,
Are the conclusions regarding the DNA analysis and serology testing that you'll testify to are the conclusions that you reach in this case accurate and reliable?
yes,
Okay. And to drill down on those definitions, by accurate do you mean that they were the result of or based on established methods of examination which are widely accepted as valid within your profession?
yes,
And are those methods widely accepted as valid by other experts in your field?
yes,
And when we use the term reliable, does that mean that the results you achieved could be replicated or duplicated by following the same established methods that you followed in this case?
yes.
Okay. Ms. Amorin, where is the current HPD main police station located?
It's located at 801 South Beretania Street in Honolulu.
Are you familiar with the place there called the Scientific Investigation Section?
Yes,
What is that?
that is HPD's forensics lab.
Is it known as SIS for short?
Yes,
And to use common terms, would that also be what somebody would call the crime lab?
yes, you can think of it as a crime lab.
What different units are there in SIS?
There are 6 different units: the forensic biology unit, the drug unit, trace unit, firearms unit, latent print unit, and the crime scene unit.
And what is the forensic biology unit?
That's the unit I work at, and that focuses on DNA testing and serology.
Does the forensic biology unit have any accreditations?
Yes,
Okay. What are they?
the lab is accredited in forensic testing.
And is it okay if I call the forensic biology unit the FBU from now on?
Sure.
When was the FBU last accredited?
It was accredited in December of 2024.
Who was the agency that issued that accreditation?
That would be ANAB, which stands for the ANSI, National Accreditation Board. Yes.
Okay, and then I know that acronym just started with a different acronym. What does ANSI stand for?
The American National Standards Institute.
Okay, so the full acronym for ANAB is American National Standards Institute, National Accreditation Board.
Yes.
Okay. All right, what does it mean to be accredited by the ANAB?
It means that the lab is 100% compliant with national and international standards in forensic testing.
And why is that significant or important?
That's important because it ensures that we're using procedures that will produce quality work.
What does the FBU do to maintain its accreditation status?
The FBU, we undergo either internal or external audits each year, which will evaluate if we are following those standards.
Now, moving on a little bit, Ms. Amorin, does the HPD FBU have standard operating procedures for DNA testing?
Yes,
And going forward, can I use the acronym SOPs for standard operating procedures?
sure, yes.
Why does HPD have SOPs?
HPD has SOPs to ensure that the analysts are using validated procedures that, again, will produce quality work.
Are you familiar with the HPD SOPs?
Yes,
As part of the SOPs, do you use control samples when doing testing?
yes.
Before I get any further, what is a control sample?
There are two control samples, a positive and negative control, and these control samples are used to either determine if there could be possible contamination in my procedures or to ensure that the instruments and the reagents that we use are working properly.
Okay. And you said two different types of control samples?
Yes,
Okay. Is the first one a reagent control?
yes, that would be the negative control.
Okay, and what does the reagent control help you determine?
That one will help me determine if there's possible contamination in any step of my procedure. In that sample, there should be no DNA, so at the end of my results, if I have no DNA in it, then I know that there's no contamination in my procedures.
And the other type of control sample you mentioned, is that the positive control?
Yes.
Okay, what is the positive control?
The positive control is a sample that has an expected DNA profile. So at the end of my testing, if I get that expected DNA profile, I know that my instruments and my reagents were working properly.
Do you use these control samples every time you do a forensic DNA analysis?
Yes, on every, it's run with every sample from the crime scene.
With these control samples, are you able to determine if the machines and instruments involved in the DNA typing process are working properly?
Yes,
Did you use these control samples and follow the procedures every time you used any machines or instruments in this case?
yes,
Did you review the results of running those control samples in this case every time you processed samples?
I did.
And what were the results of the use of the reagent control and the positive control in this case?
For both controls, they came out as expected.
Based on those results, were the machines and instruments that you used in your DNA analysis or in your forensic analysis working properly in this case?
Yes,
Ms. Amorin, are you familiar with the term validation studies?
yes.
What are these?
A validation study is a research process that the lab will use to evaluate a technique or procedure to ensure that the results are, it's an effective technique that's getting the results that we would expect.
Okay. And how do validation studies relate to the HPD standard operating procedures?
So the standard operating procedures are based on these validation studies.
So if all SOPs are followed, what can you say about the results of the DNA testing?
The results are accurate and reliable.
Ms. Amorin, I'm going to change subject just a little bit. I'm going to ask you for some definitions. So first of all, what is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and you can think of DNA as the blueprint for life because it directs the growth and functions of all living things. In humans, half of our DNA comes from our mothers and half from our fathers, and each individual's DNA is unique, making it a useful tool for human identification.
And where is DNA found?
DNA is found in the cells of the body as well as in the cells of our biological fluids like blood.
Is there any difference in DNA found from different types of cells from the same person?
I wouldn't expect there to be a difference, no.
So DNA from saliva, is that any different from DNA from blood?
It shouldn't be, no.
So in a case such as the ones you deal with at the Forensic Biology Unit, what are you trying to determine through DNA testing?
I am trying to determine whether a known individual is associated with or excluded from the evidence of a crime.
Are you familiar with contact or touch DNA?
Yes,
And how is that type of DNA transferred?
that is what the name says. So contact, or we also call it touch DNA, is transferred typically when a person will touch something, they will leave behind their skin cells that have DNA in it.
I'm going to move on just a little bit to the other subject we talked about, serology. Starting off, what is serology?
Serology is a test that we use to determine if a possible biological stain is blood, semen, or saliva.
And did you do any types of serological testing in this case?
Yes,
What kind of tests did you use?
I used two different tests for blood. The first one is called blood ID, and the second is hemotrace.
Is there any difference between the blood ID test and the hemotrace test?
Yes.
What is the difference?
So the blood ID is a color-changing test that will turn blue if positive for blood. The second test, hemotrace, is a antibody antigen test, similar to like a pregnancy test or a rapid COVID test, where two lines will indicate positive for human origin and one line would be a negative result.
Why do you do both the blood? Sorry. Why do you do both the blood ID and the hemotrace tests?
So both of these tests are used to help guide me and determine if I should take the sample for further testing for DNA or whether I can stop testing that stain because it might not be blood.
Are both the blood ID tests and the hemotrace test considered scientifically valid?
Yes,
Are they generally accepted and widely used in the field of forensic biology?
yes.
Does HPD SIS have any sort of serological or screening test to detect contact or touch DNA?
No,
Okay. To your knowledge, does any labs have that?
not to my knowledge, no.
And is touch DNA or any type of DNA visible to the naked eye?
No, it's microscopic.
Okay. Next topic, Ms. Amorin. In general, how is DNA testing performed?
DNA in general, I will take samples from my items of evidence and they will go through a series of lab procedures, and at the end I will obtain DNA profiles for those samples.
And how many steps are there?
There are 5.
And could you tell us the 5 steps?
Yes, the first one is screening, then extraction, quantification, amplification, and typing.
Okay, we're going to go through each of those 5 steps, and I'm going to ask you to explain kind of what they are. So the first step you mentioned was screening. What does the screening test mean?
Screening is a process where I will examine the item of evidence and determine where I'm going to take my samples. So I will look at this stage for stains that could possibly contain blood and take that for serology. or I'll also look for areas that might have contact or touch DNA and take samples from those areas.
And that was kind of an explanation of how you do the screening step? Okay.
Yes.
After you finish doing the screening step, what are you left with in terms of physical item or a test subject?
At the end of my screening, I'm either left with a cutting from the item, say like a piece of fabric, I'll take a cutting of it, or a swab, which is similar to like a Q-tip, where I'll rub the swab against an item to take the DNA off of it.
Okay, so, and is that it for the screening step?
Other than doing serology testing, yes.
Okay. We'll come back to the serology in a bit. So now that you've got this either swab or cutting, what's the next step in the DNA testing that you do?
So after I have my samples, they're in small little test tubes, and those samples will go through extraction.
And what is the extraction process?
So extraction is used to release the DNA from the cells. So in this step, I will add reagents, and I will also use heat to help break open the cells and release the DNA. Then I will put those samples on an instrument called a Maxwell FSC, which will then purify the sample for me.
Overall, how long does the extraction process take?
Extraction typically takes around 2 hours.
And then, okay, once you're finished with the extraction process and you've extracted the DNA from the cells, what's the third step? Or the third step.
After extraction is amplification. Is quantification.
Okay, could you explain what quantification is?
Quantification is a process where I estimate the amount of DNA in the sample. For that process, again, I'm adding reagents to a separate plate now with little wells in it, and I'm also adding a little bit of my sample, and it's run on a different instrument called a real-time PCR machine, and that instrument will use fluorescence to help me quantify how much DNA is in my samples.
And after quantification, what's the next step?
Amplification.
How does the amplification step work?
In amplification, you can think of it as like a copier machine for DNA, because it's making millions and millions of copies of the specific regions that make up the DNA profile.
And what process is used in the amplification step?
In amplification, I'm using a process called PCR, which is the polymerase chain reaction. And in this step, I'm copying the DNA strands that make up the DNA profile.
Are you familiar with the scientific principles on which PCR, or polymerase chain reaction testing, is based?
Yes.
Is the PCR process considered scientifically valid?
Yes.
Is it generally accepted and widely used in the field of forensic biology?
Yes.
Okay, so we've gone through 4 steps so far. The last step you mentioned was typing. What is the typing step?
In typing, I'm actually obtaining the DNA profile at this step.
Okay. Overall, when you're testing DNA, are you looking at the entire thing, or are you looking at a specific part?
So I'm only looking at specific regions of the DNA molecule.
Okay, and what regions, or are you familiar with what an STR is?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
So STR stands for a short tandem repeat, and you can think of DNA as a really, really long strand of 4 different colored beads. And at specific regions on this strand, the beads will repeat in pattern. And these repeating patterns are what are the STRs. So those are the sections that I'm looking at that make up the DNA profile.
Ms. Amorin, are you familiar with the underlying principles on which STR testing is based?
Yes.
And is STR testing considered scientifically valid?
Yes.
Is it generally accepted and widely used in your field?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Amorin, would two unrelated people ever expect to have the exact same DNA profile?
Unless they are identical siblings, then no. No two people will have the same DNA profile.
And can the DNA typing step tell you the gender of the contributor?
Yes, so I can tell the gender of the contributors for a DNA profile.
Okay, and how do you do that?
There are 3 different regions in the DNA profile that are sex markers, and these will help me determine if there is a male or female present in it.
And to clarify, are you doing that sort of determination in a single source sample or a mixture?
Usually only for single source
Okay,
samples in this case.
got it. And then, sorry to ask a follow-up, could you tell us the difference between a single source profile and a mixture?
A single source profile is a DNA profile from one individual, while a mixture is a DNA profile from multiple different people.
And how would you be able to tell if a profile you're looking at is single source versus a mixture?
In a single source profile, I expect to see only 2 inherited characteristics for those STRs. There's 21 that we look at, and if there should only be 1 or 2 at each location, and then that will tell me it's a single source profile. For mixtures, they'll have more than 2.
Okay. And why do you expect to only see 2 numbers at each profile?
So there's only 2 inherited characteristics because, again, you remember that you inherit from your mom and your dad, so you'll inherit 1 STR from your mom and 1 from your dad.
Almost there with the definitions. In DNA testing, what is a question sample?
A question sample is a sample from the crime scene evidence.
Do you know, at a question sample, at the start of your analysis, who contributed to that sample?
No, it's unknown, so it's questionable who is the source of this DNA.
And in DNA testing, what is a known sample or reference sample?
A known sample or reference sample is a DNA profile from a known individual.
And how would you get a reference sample normally?
How is it collected?
Yes.
I don't collect it, but typically you will get a swab and you'll swab the inside of a person's mouth.
Is it a buccal swab?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how does the DNA comparison process work?
DNA comparisons, there's 2 types. The first type is manual comparisons, and that's what I can do, is where I'll look at the DNA profile of the crime scene evidence, the question sample, and I'll compare it to the known DNA profile from that known individual and see if there's any similarities or differences. The second type of comparison is done by another analyst, and they're using a computer software to help them do the comparisons.
Okay. And you said you do the manual interpretation.
Yes.
So in this case, did you perform DNA comparisons between the question samples and known reference samples?
Yes, for some of the samples, yes.
And did any other analysts participate and use the computer program you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay, who was that?
Criminalist Scott Henderson.
So just so we're clear, in terms of your testimony today, can you tell us the extent of the analysis that you're testifying to?
I will be presenting conclusions on the presence of blood, the presence of human DNA. I will also tell you the number of contributors or the number of individuals in this DNA profile, as well as sometimes I will give you whether it's a male or female contributor. And I can also provide you with exclusions.
Okay. So in terms of manual DNA comparisons, your role in this case is limited to exclusions.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's get into this case, Ms. Amorin. In this case, were you assigned to conduct serological and DNA analysis testing under HPD report number 25-110958?
Yes.
How were you assigned to do that work?
The lab was received a request from a detective Spacek.
Do you recall which date the request came in?
March 25, 2025.
What items did you test in this case?
I tested a t-shirt, shorts, swabs from the crime scene, 2 reference buccal swabs, and a rock.
And the reference buccal swabs, is that the same thing we were talking about earlier that create the known samples?
Yes.
And just a follow-up about buccal swabs, are those buccal swabs testing saliva or other types of cells?
They're testing mainly saliva, but also the inner cheek swabs, or inner cheek cells that are taken.
Did you follow the HPD standard operating procedures when you did the testing in this case?
Yes.
And does that include the use of the control samples that we talked about earlier?
Yes.
As part of HPD's procedures, is the DNA analyst required to document their work in each case?
Yes.
And why do you do that?
We document our work to ensure we're using the correct procedures as well as to allow for review.
When you say review, as part of HPD's SOPs, are the reports and documentation in each case independently reviewed by another DNA analyst at HPD?
Yes.
What is that review process called?
It's called technical review.
And in this case, did you document your work?
Yes.
Okay, was that in one single report or more than one?
In 2 reports.
And then did these reports go through the tech review process that you just described?
Yes.
On March 31st, 2025, did you withdraw from the HPD evidence room a rock recovered from the scene that was submitted as item number 2 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
Where is the evidence room located?
The evidence room is located in the basement of HPD's main station in Honolulu.
Who has access to the actual evidence room?
Only authorized personnel.
Do you have access to the evidence room?
Yes.
Do you actually go in and retrieve evidence yourself?
No.
Okay. Can you explain to us the difference?
So I'll go to the evidence room and request certain items, and the evidence custodians will retrieve the item and sign them out to me, and I will check the packaging to make sure it's intact and the seals are intact before I sign out that I received the items.
And who did you sign out the rock item number 2 from on March 31st, 2025?
From criminalist, I'm sorry, evidence custodian Brenda Monpetit.
With regards to all the items you tested in this case, did you retrieve them all from Ms. Monpetit?
Yes.
What kind of tests did you perform on the rock listed as item number 2 in this case?
I performed blood testing and human DNA testing.
Prior to your testing, was the rock that you signed out from Brenda Monpetit in your sole and continuous custody from the time you withdrew it from the evidence room to the time that you tested it?
Yes.
How was the rock packaged?
The rock was packaged in a sealed brown paper bag, kind of like a grocery bag, and it was sealed with an evidence tape that was signed and dated.
Were the seals on that with that evidence tape tampered with, altered, or destroyed?
There was no evidence of tampering.
And from the time that you retrieved the rock to the time that you did your testing on it, did you tamper with, alter, or destroy anything about the rock?
No.
How many areas of the rock did you test?
2 different areas.
Okay. And what was the mechanics of how you tested that?
How I chose those 2 areas?
I'm sorry. What did you actually physically do to the rock?
Oh, okay. So what I did is I took samples from the rock. So again, I took swabs and I took a swabbing of either the stains or the unstained area.
Okay. And so back to that, you took the cotton Q-tip kind of swabs you were talking about?
Yes.
All right. And then did you designate the swab of the stained area as 2 parentheses 105230Q1?
Yes.
Did you designate your swab of the unstained area as 2 parentheses 105230AQ1?
Yes.
All right. What were the results of the tests? And sorry, what tests did you do on those swabs?
I performed blood serology and DNA testing.
All right. We're going to go to that first swab. What were the results of the test that you performed on the rock, on the stained portion of the rock designated as 2105230Q1?
The results were screening for the presence of human blood was positive, and screening for the presence of human DNA was positive.
Okay, so the serological tests, the blood ID and the hemodin came back positive,
Yes.
and the DNA, there was also human DNA present.
Yes.
Were you able to obtain, or sorry, before I get there, how many contributors were on that stained side of the rock?
For the stain, may I review my report?
Sure, your report is, I believe, on a binder behind you. If you could flip to, I think it's exhibit number 200, and let us know when you're done.
Okay. For the stain area of the rock, the DNA profile obtained was consistent with one female individual.
Okay. So total number of contributors to the stained area of the rock was?
1.
And the gender of the contributor?
Female.
Ms. Amorin, did I miss any other results from that sample yet?
No. There is one more thing I can say.
Okay. Is that about a comparison?
Yes.
Okay. We'll come back to the comparison.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to move on to the next swab, the swab from the unstained area of the rock. What were the results of the test that you performed on the unstained area of the rock, designated 2 parentheses 105230AQ1?
Screening for the presence of human DNA was positive.
Was there any results from any serological testing?
No.
So, got it. Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from the unstained area of the rock?
Yes.
How many contributors?
2.
And because there were 2 contributors, did you determine male or female?
No.
All right, and we'll get to, did you do any comparisons for the unstained part of the rock?
I did not.
Okay, is that the computer comparisons that were done later by Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So I'm moving forward. On March 31st, 2025, did you withdraw from the HPD evidence room a swab titled as Swab from Stain from Plant Off Trail that was submitted as item number 3 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
Who did you sign that item out from?
From Brenda Montpetit.
Was this item then designated in your report as lab control 3 parentheses 105230Q1?
Yes.
And I'm going to pause from the questions for a minute. When we say Q1 at the end of those numbers, bless you. When we say Q1, what does that mean?
Q1 is just a way for the lab to designate that this is from a question sample or the sample from the crime scene. So there's a Q at the end of the sample name.
Got it. And what kind of tests did you perform on this swab 3105230Q1?
I performed blood serology and human DNA testing.
Prior to your testing, was this swab that you signed out from Brenda Montpetit in your sole and continuous custody from the time you withdrew it from the evidence room to the time you tested it?
Yes.
Were there any seals broken on that swab?
No.
And then prior to conducting your testing, was the swab tampered with, altered, or destroyed in any way while it was in your custody and control?
No.
What were the results of the test that you performed on the swab designated 3 parentheses 105230 Q1? And let's start with the serological testing.
Screening for the presence of human blood was positive, and screening for the presence of human DNA was positive.
So ultimately, were you able to obtain a DNA profile from this swab?
Yes.
Were you able to estimate a number of contributors?
Yes.
How many?
2 contributors.
And again, because and is an estimate of 2 contributors, is that considered a single sample, a single source sample, or a mixture?
It's considered a mixture.
And because this was a mixed sample, did you determine the gender of any contributors?
No.
Right. And then did you do any comparison for this swab?
No.
Okay. Was there a comparison done with the computer program later?
Yes.
Got it. All right. Moving on. On March 31st, 2025, did you withdraw from the HPD evidence room a swab labeled as stain from plant from leaf on trail?
Yes.
And that was submitted as item number 4 under HPD report 25-110958.
Yes.
And who did you sign that swab out from?
Brenda Montpetit.
And was this item designated as lab control 4, parentheses 105230, and parentheses Q1?
Yes.
What kind of test did you perform on this swab?
I performed blood serology and human DNA testing.
Prior to your testing, was the swab that you signed out from Brenda Montpetit in your sole and continuous custody from the time you withdrew it to the time you tested it?
Yes.
Were there any seals that were broken on that swab that you could see?
There were no seals broken.
Prior to conducting the testing, was the swab tampered with, altered, destroyed, substituted in any way while it was in your custody and control?
No.
Okay. And then could you tell us the results of the tests that you performed on the swab designated 4, parentheses 105230 Q1?
Screening for the presence of human blood was positive, and screening for the presence of human DNA was positive.
And were you able to obtain a DNA profile from this swab?
Yes.
Was this a single source sample or was this a mixture?
Single source from one individual.
Okay. And as it was single source from one individual, were you able to determine a gender?
Yes, it was female.
And then did you do any comparisons for this swab?
Yes.
And we'll come back to that in a few minutes as well. Okay, moving forward to the next item, Ms. Amorin. On March 31st, 2025, did you withdraw from the HPD evidence room a swab titled as stain from tree branch that was submitted as item number 5 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
Okay. And then who did you send that item out from?
Brenda Montpetit.
And did you designate that item in your report as lab control 5, parentheses 105230, and parentheses Q1?
Yes.
And since I keep reading all these parentheses out, what does those numbers 105230 mean?
That's just my ID number.
Got it. Okay. And since you're the one doing the testing, you put your ID number next to it.
Yes.
What kind of test did you perform on the swab labeled as 5, parentheses 105230, and parentheses Q1?
Blood serology and human DNA testing.
Okay. Prior to your testing, was this swab that you signed out from Brenda Montpetit in your sole and continuous custody from the time you withdrew it to the time you tested it?
Yes.
And prior to conducting the testing, was the swab tampered with, altered, destroyed, or substituted in any way while it was in your custody and control?
No.
All right. Ms. Amorin, what were the results of the test that you performed on the swab designated as 5, parentheses 105230 Q1?
Screening for the presence of human blood was positive, and screening for the presence of human DNA was positive.
Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from this swab?
Yes.
And was this a single source or a mixture profile?
This was single source, so one contributor.
And what was the gender of the contributor?
Female.
And did you do any comparisons for this swab?
Yes.
So manual comparisons for swab 5105230.
Yes.
Next swab, Ms. Amorin. On March 31st, 2025, did you withdraw from the HPD evidence room a swab titled as stain from ground under bush, labeled as item number 6 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
Okay. And then who did you sign that item out from?
Brenda Monpetit.
Was this item designated as lab control 6, parentheses 105230, and parentheses Q1?
Yes.
What kind of test did you perform on this swab number 6?
Blood serology and human DNA testing.
Prior to your testing of this swab, was from the time that you signed it out from Brenda Montpetit to the time you tested it, was it in your sole and continuous custody and control?
Yes.
And were there any broken seals on the packaging?
No.
Prior to conducting the testing, was the swab tampered with, altered, destroyed, or substituted in any way while it was in your sole custody and control?
No.
What were the results of the test that you performed on the swab designated as 6, parentheses 105230, and parentheses Q1?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA testing were positive.
Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from this swab?
Yes.
Was this a single source profile or a mixture?
This one was a single source profile.
Okay. And were you able to determine the gender of the contributor?
Yes.
What was that gender?
Female.
All right, Ms. Emmer, next object. On March 31st, 2025, did you also withdraw from the evidence room a T-shirt labeled as recovered from the defendant that was submitted as item number 13 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
Okay. And then who did you sign that item out from?
Brenda Monpetit.
Now, so far you've talked about swabs from Iraq. What's different about testing, doing DNA testing on a T-shirt?
For the T-shirt, I took cuttings from this item instead of swabs.
And how many samples or cuttings did you take from item 13, the T-shirt?
6.
And as part of your work, do you document the areas of the T-shirt that you take cuttings from?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach now with States Exhibit 134 and 135 previously shown to defense?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Amorin, I've just handed you what's been marked as States Exhibit 134 and 135. Do you recognize what I've just handed you?
Yes.
Okay, what are these?
These are the photos I took during the screening of the T-shirt.
And what do these photos show?
These show the front and the back of the T-shirt with stickers indicating the areas I sampled.
And do these photos fairly and accurately depict item 13, the T-shirt, and the locations of the shirt that you sampled for DNA on March 31st, 2025?
Yes.
At this point, the state moves to admit States 134 and 135 into evidence.
Mr. Otake. No objection. Will be marked for identification as States Exhibit 134 and 135 will be received into evidence.
And permission to publish.
Granted.
All right, publishing now States Exhibit 134. Okay, Ms. Amorin, I'm going to hand you this iPad, and you can use a little stylus on it. If you could explain and show us the areas that you tested on this photograph.
So this is the front of the t-shirt, and there are 4 different areas that I tested. I observed 4 stains. So the first stain is this one here, and that one is the stain on the exterior right armpit.
And I'm sorry, what was there a number assigned to that one?
Yes, this is 13-10530-Q1.
So that one is Q1 for the item number 13.
Yes.
Okay.
The second sample, Q2, is right there, and that is the stain on the exterior right chest.
Okay. And what Q number was this given?
Q2.
So using a short term, it would be item 13, Q2.
Yes.
Okay.
The third item, the third sample is there, and that is Q3. That is the exterior front bottom left.
Okay.
And Q4 is this last one here, which is the stain on the exterior front bottom right.
Okay. I'm going to walk up to the stand. I'm going to retrieve the iPad. I'm going to publish then States Exhibit 135, and we'll do the same thing. All right, we have States Exhibit 135 being published right now. Ms. Amorin, could you explain to us and show us using the laser pointer function which areas you tested?
This is the back of the t-shirt, and there are 2 stains that I sampled. The first one is, it's not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ooh. Ooh. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. This stain on the top is the stain on the exterior back top.
Okay. And what number or Q number was this given?
That is Q5.
Okay. And is this still item 13?
Yes.
Okay, so can we call this 13Q5?
Yes.
Okay. Is it okay going forward that I take out that string of numbers that's your ID? in each
Sure.
one? Got it. Okay, and what is the other stain or the other sample that you took from the rear of the t-shirt?
The last sample was Q6, which is this stain here, and that is the exterior back center.
Okay. Ms. Everett, I'm going to retrieve the iPad from you now. All right, what kind of tests did you perform on those 6 samples from item number 13, the t-shirt?
I performed blood serology and human DNA testing.
Okay. Prior to your testing, I'm sorry, I'm back. Did you take cuttings or swabs from this?
I took cuttings.
Got it. And how do you take the cuttings?
I use a scissors to cut a small piece of the fabric with the stain on it.
And prior to your testing, was item number 13 the t-shirt that you signed out from Brenda Montpetit? Was it in your sole and continuous custody from the time you withdrew it from her at the evidence room to the time that you tested it?
Yes.
Prior to conducting your testing, was the t-shirt tampered with, altered, destroyed in any way while it was in your custody and control?
No.
And were there any damages to the tamper-proof seals on the evidence?
No.
All right. Ms. Amorin, can you walk us through the results of your 6 samples from the shirts? And I'm actually going to put up States Exhibit 134. If we can start with Q1. I'm sorry, this is States Exhibit 135. Publishing 134. And we're going to zoom in on the areas. So for the area marked Q1, what was the results of your testing?
For Q1, the stain on exterior right armpit, screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA was positive.
And for Q1, the stain on exterior right armpit, was that a single source or multiple?
Multiple.
And as it was a multiple source, did you determine, and could you determine the number of contributors?
Yes, there were 2.
Okay. And because there were 2 possible contributors, did you determine a gender?
No.
Got it. All right, moving on to,
I'm always thinking about my next move. So when I found
Sorry.
out
Apologize.
that vaping actually
Sorry about that.
could you tell us the results of your testing on item number 13Q2?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
And was this a single source or a multiple source?
Single source.
Okay. So Q2, stain on exterior right chest was single source?
Yes.
And were you able to get a DNA profile from that?
Yes.
And were you able to determine a gender?
Yes.
What was the gender?
Female.
Okay, Ms. Amorin, going on to Q number 3, the stain on the exterior front bottom, which is, can you look at the screen? Am I circling the correct one here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What were the results of your DNA testing with regards to the cutting from 13Q3?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile from this sample?
Yes.
Was it a single source profile? I'm sorry, how many contributors?
There were 2 contributors.
So not a single source profile.
No.
So as it was not a single source profile, did you determine whether it was male or female?
No.
All right. Moving on now to Q4, listed as the stain on exterior front bottom right, which I'm circling now on the screen. What were the results of your DNA and serological testing on that sample?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
And was that, or how many contributors?
For that sample, there were 2 contributors.
And because it was 2 contributors, was it a single source or a mixture?
It was a mixture.
And because it was a mixture, did you determine the gender of any contributors?
No.
Right. We're going to now publish States Exhibit 135. And I'm going to zoom in on where the samples were. I'm sorry. Okay. Ms. Amorin, what were the results of your DNA and serological testing on Q5 listed as stain on exterior back top? And I'm highlighting the area now.
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
Okay. Were you able to estimate a number of contributors?
Yes.
How many?
There were 2.
So was this a single source profile or a mixture?
It was a mixture.
Right. And as it was a mixture, again, were you able to determine male or female?
No.
All right. And last sample for this piece of evidence, Ms. Amorin, looking at Q6, where I've highlighted now, the stain on exterior back center. What was the results of your serological and DNA testing on this sample?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
Okay. And were you able to estimate a number of contributors?
Yes. There was 1.
1 contributor. Okay. Were you able to get a DNA profile?
Yes.
Okay. And were you able to determine the gender of that single contributor?
Yes, it was female.
Okay, Ms. Amorin, but for item number 13, and that's Q1 through Q6, on the 6 samples, did you do any comparisons manually yourself for these samples?
For any single source DNA profile, I did manual comparisons, yes.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you said the single sources in this one were Q2, the stain on exterior right chest, and Q6, the stain on exterior back center. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. I'm going to take Exhibit 135 down for now. And we'll come back again in a few minutes to those comparisons. Now I'm going to move into the next section. Do you think now is appropriate for a break?
We could do it now, or we could do it in about 10 minutes.
We'll go about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Sure. All right, Ms. Amorin, moving on a little bit to item number 14. On March 31st, 2025, did you also withdraw from the evidence room a pair of shorts recovered from the defendant labeled as item 14 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
Who did you sign those items out from?
Brenda Montpetit.
And overall, how many samples did you take from item number 14, the shorts?
I sampled 6 different areas.
Okay. And were these swabs or cuttings?
Cuttings.
As part of your work, did you document the areas of the shorts that you took the cuttings from?
Yes.
May I approach with what's been marked as State's Exhibit 136, 137, and 138, previously shown to defense? I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 136, 137, 138. Before you look at those, could I take back 134 and 135? Thank you. Okay, Ms. Amorin, do you recognize what I've just handed you?
Yes.
Okay, and what are these?
These are the photos I took of the shorts during my screening stage.
Do these photos these photos also show the areas that you took the cuttings?
Yes.
Do these photos fairly and accurately depict item 14, the shorts, and the locations of the shorts that you tested for DNA and serology on March 31st, 2025?
Yes.
At this point, the state moves exhibits 136 through 138, inclusive, into evidence.
Mr. Otake,
No objection.
what has been marked for identification as State's Exhibits 135, 136, 137, and 138 receiving evidence.
Okay, and permission to publish.
Granted.
Publishing 136 on the screen right now. Okay. Ms. Amorin, I've published dates 136 on the screen. I'm going to hand you the iPad with the pen, and if you could circle and show us where you took the cuttings from, as well as highlight it with the pen.
So this is the back of the shorts, and there's 2 stains that I sampled. The first one is the stain on exterior back center, which is this big stain here. And that's Q1, and Q2 is this stain here, which is the stain on exterior back right.
Okay. I'm going to approach and I'm going to put up the next exhibit and we'll do the same. Publishing now states 137. All right, could you demonstrate, Ms. Amorin, for us where you took cuttings on this photo?
So this is the inner pants of the shorts, and this stain here, which is stain on exterior of inner pants, Q3.
Okay. And that's the only stain in this photo?
That's the only new stain, yes.
Okay. And I'm going to approach and I'm going to publish. Now it states 138. All right. States 138 is now on the screen. Ms. Amorin, could you show us on this exhibit where you took cuttings for testing?
This is the front of the shorts, and there's 3 different areas I sampled. The first one is the stain on exterior top right, which is here. And That is Q4. The next stain is Q5, which is the stain on exterior front middle right, which is this one here. And Q6 is the stain on the exterior front left, which is here.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to retrieve the iPad from you now. And I'm going to remove states 1, 3, 8. Okay. Miss Amorin, what kind of tests did you perform? And overall, how many samples did you take from the shorts?
6.
Overall, what kind of tests did you perform on those 6 samples?
I performed human DNA testing and blood serology.
Prior to your testing of these shorts and the samples you took from them, from the time you signed them out from Brandon Montpetit, were they in your sole and continuous custody until you tested them?
Yes.
When you signed them out, were there any broken seals on the packages?
No.
And prior to conducting your testing, did you tamper with, alter, destroy, substitute in any way the shorts item number 14 or any of the samples?
No.
Ms. Amorin, we're going to walk through those 6 samples you took, and I'll ask you for each one of them what your results were, and if you can explain, okay?
Yes.
All right. And then I'm going to publish so we can go along together with the photograph. So publishing now states Exhibit 136. And for Q1, Ms. Amorin, you said that was the large stain in the center. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What were the results of your serology and human DNA testing for this sample?
Screening for the presence of human blood was negative, and no further testing was performed. So no DNA testing.
Got it. Okay. For Q2, which is the stain on exterior back right, which I'm circling at the top of the photo, what were the results of your serological and DNA testing?
Screening for the presence of human blood was negative. No further testing was performed.
So no DNA testing.
Yes, no DNA testing.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to publish now States Exhibit number 137. And I'm going to... All right, 137 is on the screen. Circling the stain you indicated earlier on the bottom as Q3, stain on exterior of inner pants. What were your results of your DNA and serological testing for this sample?
Screening for the presence of human blood was negative. No further testing was performed.
So no DNA testing.
Yes, no DNA testing.
All right. And moving on to publish now States Exhibit 138. The Q4 from item number 14, stain on exterior front top right, which I'm going to circle with the laser pointer right now. Am I circling the correct one?
Yes.
Okay. What were the results of your DNA and serological testing on item number 14Q4?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
Okay. Was this a single source sample or not?
Yes, it was a single source.
Okay. So because it was single source, did you then, be redundant, what was the number of contributors?
1 contributor.
Okay. And was that contributor, were you able to determine the gender?
Yes, it was female.
Okay. Moving on to item number 14, the shorts, Q5, stain on exterior front middle right. I'm circling on the screen. Have I circled the correct one?
Yes.
Okay. What were the results of your serological and DNA testing for this item?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
Okay. Were you able to determine a number of contributors?
Yes, one female contributor.
And then were you able to get a DNA profile from this as well?
Yes.
Okay, and cycling back to Q4, were you also able to generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
Okay. And our last sample for the shorts, item number 14Q6, stain on exterior front left, which I'm circling. Did I circle the correct area?
Yes.
Okay. What were the results of your serological and DNA testing for this sample?
Screening for the presence of human blood and human DNA were positive.
Okay. Were you able to determine a number of contributors?
Yes. There were 2.
Okay. And were you able to generate a DNA profile from this sample?
Yes.
And was this a single source or mixture?
A mixture of 2 people.
And as it was a mixture, did you determine the gender?
No.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to take States Exhibit 138 down. I think now before I move into the next topic would be a good time.
Be a good time for recess. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let's take a 10-minute recess. Ms. Alpha Fisher will collect you shortly after you have leave your notebooks on the chair. All right. Versus Gerhardt Konig, 1 CPC-25-373. Konig is present in court with all 4 counsel of record. All jurors are back in the courtroom, and Ms. Michelle Amorin on stand, still under oath. Mr. Garner, you may continue.
Thank you. Before we jump back into swabs and results or tests, Ms. Amorin, I'm going to hand you what's been entered into evidence so far as States Exhibit 29 and States Exhibit 30 in this case. We'll start with States Exhibit 29. When you say you take cuttings from these items, how big of a hole do you leave?
A small hole,
Okay.
around less than a centimeter
And
square.
Can you still see all the holes of the cuttings you took on this exhibit?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to retrieve States Exhibit 29, and we'll do the same with 30. And then can you see the cuttings that you took on this exhibit as well?
Yes. They are small, about a centimeter at the largest.
Right. Thanks for showing us.
Mhm.
Okay, Michelle, in addition to the samples, the question samples that you've already talked about this morning, did you test any reference samples for this case?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We're not quite done with the question samples, are we? Oh, I'm sorry. We are. My bad. Okay, reference samples. Could you remind everybody what a reference sample is?
A reference sample is a sample taken from a known individual.
And whose reference samples did you have access to in this case?
I had access to 2 samples, one from Konig and one from Gerhardt Konig.
And was Konig's reference sample labeled as item number 24 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
And was Gerhardt Konig's reference sample listed as item number 45 under HPD report 25-110958?
Yes.
On March 31st, 2025, did you retrieve item 24, Konig's reference buccal swab sample, as well as item 45, Gerhardt Konig's reference buccal swab sample from the evidence room?
Yes.
Who did you recover them from?
I recovered them from Brenda Montpetit.
How were these reference buccal swabs packaged?
They were received in sealed manila envelopes.
And at the time you received them, how many seals were on each package?
1 seal on each package.
And was each seal signed or initialed?
Yes.
Were any seals broken?
No.
And was item 24 listed in your lab report as 24K1,
Yes.
and was item number 45 listed as 45K1.
Yes.
Okay, so all the swabs or samples we talked about earlier were Q1, Q2. Why are these K numbers?
So the Q was for the question samples, and the K is to indicate that it's from a known individual, a known sample.
And then what kind of test did you perform on these two swabs, 24K1 and 45K1?
DNA testing.
Prior to your testing, were the swabs that you signed out from Brenda Montepetit, items number 24 and items 45, in your sole custody and control from the time you withdrew them to the time you tested them?
Yes.
Prior to conducting the testing, while those items were in your control, were they tampered with, altered, substituted, or destroyed in any way?
No.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from item number 24, Gerhardt Konig's reference sample?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from item number 45, Gerhardt Konig's reference sample?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the last area of questions I want to ask Ms. Amorin is to follow up on some comparisons you said you made earlier. In which kind of question samples did you compare the question sample with the two known reference samples?
So I made comparisons when the question sample was single source or from one individual, and I could make my manual exclusions.
Okay. And were your comparisons only limited to exclusions?
Yes.
Okay. So based on your comparison for the sample 2Q1, the stained portion of item 2, the rock, what were your results with the manual interpretation?
For the stain from the rock, Gerhardt Konig is excluded as a contributor to the DNA profile obtained.
All right. For item number 4Q1, which is the swab from the swab titled "Stain from Plant Leaf on Trail," what was your conclusion during the manual comparison, again with regards to exclusions?
Same conclusion, Gerhardt Konig is excluded as a contributor to the DNA profile obtained.
All right. Swab or sample 5Q1, which was titled "Stain from Tree Branch." What was your result of your manual comparison, again, as it relates to exclusion?
Gerhardt Konig is excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained. Sample number 13Q2. You mentioned that you did do a comparison, and that was the T-shirt stain on exterior right chest, right? Yes.
Okay, what were the results of your manual interpretation for 13Q2?
Gerhardt Konig is excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained.
And lastly, item number 13Q6, titled "Stain on Exterior Back Center." What was the results of your manual comparison, again, as it relates to exclusions?
Gerhardt Konig is excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained.
Did I miss any other manual comparisons that you made?
I think there was one more for the shorts.
Oh, okay. So it's item number 14.
Actually, two.
Okay, and that's 14
Q4 and Q5.
Q4 and Q5?
Yes.
Okay, so for item number 14, the shorts, sample Q4, titled "Stain on Exterior Front Top Right," what were the results of your manual comparison?
Same exclusion, Gerhardt Konig is excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained.
And for item 14, the shorts, Q5, for the samples titled "Stain on Exterior Front Middle Right," what was the result of your manual interpretation?
Same exclusion. Gerhardt Konig is excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained.
All right, so that is 7 manual comparisons you did?
Yes.
For each of those samples, what was the result of the presence for blood?
In all of those samples, the presence of human blood was positive.
And in all of those samples, were you able to determine the gender of the contributor?
Yes, it was all one female individual.
All right. Any other comparisons done by yourself?
No.
Okay. And who else did any further comparisons?
Criminalist Scott Henderson.
Okay. All right. Did everything you testified to occur in the city and county of Honolulu, state of Hawaii?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Amorin.
Good morning.
We've been here a couple hours, and are you aware that the jury in this case has seen photographs of Ariel Konig's head covered in blood? Have you seen those photographs?
I have not.
Okay, and but your testimony is basically the blood that was swabbed was a female's blood, right? As it relates to the clothing and blood items was female blood, right?
Human blood was positive, yes.
And for a female, right?
And yes, and there was a female contributor to some of the results that I presented.
Okay. You mentioned that DNA can be obtained from both bodily fluid and cells, yes?
Yes.
And bodily fluid, saliva, blood, semen, things like that, yes?
Yes.
And you mentioned that sometimes cells, microscopic on an object, might not be visible to the naked eye, correct?
Yes.
But bodily fluid as well could be on something, and a human eye may not be able to see it on an object, yes?
It's possible, yes.
So, for example, when it came to the rock, item 2, you mentioned, ma'am, that you took 2 swabs of different areas of the rock, yes?
Yes.
So you took a swab of what you refer to as a stained area on the rock, yes?
Correct.
And then you took a swab of an unstained area, correct?
Yes.
But you didn't swab every part of the entire rock, just 2 parts of it, yes?
Yes, just those 2 specific areas.
And so you only tested for the presence of bodily fluid or cells from 2 specific areas on the rock, yes?
Yes.
So it's possible that additional parts of the rock that were not tested could have had additional bodily fluids, yes?
It's possible, yes.
And then there were 2 people's profiles associated with the rock, the stained area and the unstained area, 2 profiles, yes?
I did obtain 2 different profiles for the 2 different areas, yes.
Yeah, related to the rock, yes?
Yes.
All right. Now, ma'am, you've been doing DNA for how many years?
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years, and a lot of science. Thank you for sharing all of that. I want to just ask you a few questions about. We've talked about what DNA can tell us, but I want to ask you about what some things DNA cannot tell us. Okay.
Okay.
So DNA can tell us whose blood was on an item. Yes.
It can indicate yes,
Okay.
if the source.
Yeah, the source of the blood on the rock, the plants, the clothing. Yes.
Sorry, it doesn't give the source, but it'll give you a likelihood ratio.
Likelihood ratio. I appreciate that. So it can give us a likelihood ratio, likelihood of whose blood it may be. Yes.
Yes.
And that's something DNA can tell us. Correct.
Yes.
Obviously, DNA cannot tell us how the blood got there. Correct.
That is correct. Yeah.
DNA cannot tell us how an altercation may have started. Correct.
Yes.
DNA cannot tell us who may have started an altercation, correct?
Yes.
You know, a lot of science, and one of the benefits of science is that typically speaking, ideally, if it's done well, like I'm sure you guys do, science is unbiased, right? Generally speaking.
Yes.
It doesn't have a
should be.
motive. It's not manipulative. It has no motive to lie. It just is what it is, right?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. No further questions.
Any redirect? Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Ms. Amorin, you were asked some questions about how you did the samples for item 2 of the rock.
Yes.
Okay. If I hand you the rock, could you demonstrate for us how you take samples from those 2 areas?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 2. I'm sorry, if you could try to speak into the microphone while holding the exhibit up, and could you demonstrate how you took the sample first from the stained area?
Yes. So when I examine the item, I'll take it out and I will look for stains or areas that have DNA, touch DNA present. So when I opened the rock, I looked for any stained areas. And on this side, I could see that there's a stain. So I took a swabbing of that area for the first sample, which is the stain from the rock. And then I looked at the rest of the rock to see where it was unstained, and I just took a sample of that whole area and took half of that for my testing.
Okay. When you say took a sample of that whole area, what does that mean?
That means I took the swab and I swabbed that area, ran the swab against the rock in the unstained parts.
And you said you swabbed about half of the unstained part?
I swabbed all of the unstained parts and only took half of that sample for my testing.
I see.
Half of the swab.
So for the unstained part of the rock, just to clarify, you took the Q-tip looking swab and you swabbed the entire unstained area?
Yes.
Okay. But the only item that you actually tested was half of that Q-tip?
Yes.
Got it. Were you wearing gloves as you did this?
Yes, I was wearing protective gear, lab coat, gloves, mask.
Why were you wearing gloves?
This is to preserve the evidence as it is and not to introduce DNA from a foreign source, which would be me.
Okay. And I want to clarify something with the rock one more time. From the stained area at the bottom, how many contributors were there?
There was one
Okay.
female.
One female. Okay. And from the unstained area that you swabbed, how many contributors were there?
There were two.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions. I'm going to retrieve the exhibit from you.
Just brief follow-up. Thank you, Ms. Amorin. So just to be clear, there are parts of the rock that were not stained, that was not tested, correct?
Yes, whatever was left on the swab that I preserved and didn't test.
And there may be parts of the rock that you didn't actually even swab, right?
Yes,
All right.
yes.
Thank you.
Any other redirect? Nothing.